machines, you know, and then the scientists say, well, that can't be done, you know, but we intend to show, you know, that we had a new environmental source which they don't recognize, you know, so that's resolving the problem.
Well, that's fabulous. Thank you for joining us. Okay, I'll fiddle up. John, you have been a guest of mine several times.
I've been very lucky.
Based on the interview that I just had with John Shelbourne, what are some of your thoughts? And now that he's here with us, how would you like to take this?
I've known John for a while, and I admire him tremendously.
Vice versa, too, John.
I would like to start really at the bottom, rather than moving up to something on the ethical plane. Let's start with how this is going to unfold. John.
Oh, hang on. Okay, John, I had to get the battery there.
Okay, we're back.
We're rolling, yeah.
John, let me ask you some prosaic questions. I know that you've solicited the advice of people to get these so-called experimental machines, and you were going to examine them. What do they belong to any specific theories, or can you explain how they might think this could happen?
Well, yeah, I think they're pretty closely related to what we would consider the ordinary heat pump, which is, you know, a thing that you use, you know, it's used universally. You use it for your refrigerator, you use it to heat and cool your house, and you're essentially going out to the environment and capturing a quantity of energy and moving it into a new location where you can use it. Of course, it's not exactly like a heat pump, because where the energy starts from is a place really that we can't observe. It's like the background of space, where we think of a thing, but it's not a thing. It's nothingness. And yet, that is the source, universal source, where the energy comes from, and then it goes through a conversion process, which brings it where it is usable, measurable into our universe, so that then we can apply it like we want to.
The sump that we draw from seems, many physicists, I don't know how many are included in this, but many consider this vast sump as a frothing, boiling sink of many frequencies and energy sources of subatomic, that's lower than the atom, smaller than the atom, particles. But this energy is in the form of paired energy. In other words, where there's a plus energy charge, there's a minus. So when the two are mated together, they may differ in another pair by frequency, and that has given rise to this. What was the Dutch physicist?
Casimir.
The Casimir effect. Okay, I can understand that. But now, isn't the basic problem somehow to get these pairs? And now, I assume, since there's so many people agree that this is a situation, that there's some way we can verify that there is this big soup of and frothing sort of, it's what people would consider a vacuum, in the vacuum at all. There is all this energy out there, and it's in the form of paired electrons, or not electrons so much as particles.
Right.
Okay, now the real basic problem is to separate these particles so that you can take advantage of the difference between the two to generate energy.
Right. Well, that's already been done for us by virtue of the charge on atomic particles, the plus and the minus. there is no energy balance that can be performed on the charges of electrons or protons. The reason is because the source of the energy of the charge on those particles is unobserved. It can't be detected. It goes back to that analogy you were making about the paired particles that flash into existence and then go back out of existence, come in and back out. Well, that's the model that the sources that I'm familiar with are currently using to explain the energy balance for the positive and the negative charges. So if you can use the energy of charges properly and not cancel out the beneficial effects of the two charges, I'm speaking of the separation of charges right now, the dipole, the plus and minus on a battery, whatever you want to call it. If you can keep from destroying the separation of the charges, then that energy will flow out indefinitely. And so,
isn't that the core of the problem, to arrange the separation?
mm-hmm.
And can you, some of the things I've heard about are bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
There's an article in the recent New York Times
mm-hmm.
on bringing so-called fusion down to the desktop level.
Right.
And can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think science, present-day science here in the year 2007, and just in recent years, have discovered that the so-called fusion process doesn't necessarily have to be the traditional model, which is the high-temperature model, which comes from astronomical sources where we account for the energy of the sun from the fusion process.
Yeah, or a star.
But the fusion in these cases is what they call low energy fusion, or popularly called cold fusion. I think they've discovered this in chemistry or electrochemistry with Pons and Fleischmann, and I think they'll eventually discover that the process is universal in the environment. Not only plants, but animals and other things in the environment are utilizing this low energy fusion process. So I think there's a source too where it's you're going to have a potential source of energy, but you might have to deal with fusion products. You know, if something comes out of the fusion reaction that's radioactive, then you've got something that you don't
But it's
want.
low level and should be benign, so that
should
might
be
not.
pretty benign because it was low energy to start with. Yeah.
Right.
So. There's something else. The mere fact of material particles reacting is going to result in energy. But my philosophy is, my own personal philosophy is that the combustion part of it is the thing that you want to avoid if you can.
Which
the burning.
Which is cold fusion.
Cold fusion is a burning. You know, it's a nuclear type burning.
But let me bring up one other concept.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading not too long ago that the energy from stars comes from a different process than fusion.
Right.
And that you can identify fusion by the presence of fusion products, which normally are things you can pick up. They're byproducts of they're radioactive in one form or another.
Right.
Whereas the energy from some stars doesn't show this at all. It seems as though it's a direct conversion of space-time, which is I don't think anyone can comprehend what space-time is. But,
well, I have a thing. Yeah, I have a thing called.
But in that case, there's no burning. It's a direct conversion.
Well, that's very prescient and material to this discussion is a way of converting the energy. I spoke of the charges. You know, the two charges, the plus and the minus. Well, another way of converting it would be this direct conversion, and My name that I've given to it is called a pointing window. Pointing is a scientist whose name was used to describe radiated electromagnetic energy in space. Pointing, P-O-I-N-T-I-N-G. And pointing gate essentially takes the space-time, takes it through a process, and it directly converts the energy of the potential there in space-time to observable energy. Now, the conditions to form the pointing gate are very particular. Yeah, I mean, it's an involved process. It's an assembly of the proper elements and the conditions for that to happen.
Sounds like alchemy.
Yeah, it's like alchemy. And then I'm just discovering this in a recent invention I was looking at, where this fellow has a magnet, an electromagnet on one side and a permanent magnet on the other, and he brings the permanent magnet by the electromagnet, and the permanent magnet induces power in the coil of wire around the core of the electromagnet.
Okay.
But it's not just a single pulse of energy. There's an initial pulse and then a reactive pulse, and the reactive pulse comes from space. There's no other source of energy that's available. There's no candidate with their hand held up. I'm supplying the energy. No, it's coming from space, the so-called nothingness, the one that most conventional scientists say, doesn't affect anything. Well, this particular invention uses that pulse, and the energy of that pulse is so powerful that the construction of the circuit has to be exactly right, or it will either not work, it will work in a controlled fashion, or it will explode. So, I think some people may think that sounds sort of ridiculous. Well, and for those people, in their experience, they have very low likelihood of success of trying this. But if they use my method, which is the shoe leather method, which is you go out and you find the person, because the inspiration comes right down from above. You have people with no education doing miraculous things. They don't know how they do it, but they do it. And you observe this, then your job is to make sense out of it and to engineer it and put a theory and find a theory.
Example?
Find a theory that it fits. Well, there's so many different examples out there that I've looked at. I'm looking at a transistor right now that's been modified, and the transistor essentially is able to couple with what I call the non-local environment, all of the hidden variables of Bohm, David Bohm, the famous quantum physicist.
Really?
All the information content that exists that enters our instruments, human instrument or the mechanical instrument, from whatever distance. Right now, with
our senses?
With all other senses, it's a partial type thing, except for our brains and our potential that we have built in that we're yet to utilize. The transistor that I'm speaking of has been able to couple to the input sources of information completely, as if we were a fully evolved human being, a fully actualized human being. In other words, we might say to ourselves, if we were yogis and could do anything that we could think of, I'd like to be in Paris, France right now, and we would.
This transistor?
Then the transistor takes it in an elementary way. It's an instrument, it's a mechanical device. It will sense the input of information.
Like a thought? Or what input?
Potentially in the future, but right now we're talking about, for instance, electromagnetic radiation. Like the camera you're holding in your hand, it's taking in electromagnetic information. And the transistor then can be able to provide to other instruments many details that are not conventionally available to standard electromagnetic instruments, as if you were there at the object that you were trying to sense right there. being present, no matter what the distance.
Instead of me giving my viewers a video of this conversation, I could make you materialize.
Right. You can make a hologram.
I could make
you can
you
make
there
me
and make John
materialize.
there.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah. And so I was trying to let me just finish real
Sure.
quick. My thought is that what we're talking about is the effects of the quantum variables, the information that actually makes up all of the separate entities that we think that we're perceiving. Okay? And so this is the first time that not just dealing with quantum parameters, because they've got quantum computers out there, but they're only dealing with external quantum parameters, the spin of the electron, whether it's plus or minus, left or right, up or down. This goes to the object that is being sensed in a sense of like remote connection, like remote viewing.
I see.
So I'm looking at this device. I went out on the internet. I did some research, and I found a few people that have already got the theory. Isn't it wonderful that when information and knowledge enters our sensed universe, that it's not just at one place, it's at more than one place. It's like calculus was invented by two people, not one person. The benefit there should be obvious, is that the thing can come into existence, and it's been traditionally called the 100-monkey effect. Okay.
It makes you wonder where
I
thought
overrode
comes from.
John. I just wanted to get through to the end of my...
I understand. This is interesting to me, but how can we... I'm fairly far more interested. I don't know how this would affect, or maybe it would. Maybe we could point this out. How is this going to affect the production of energy for practical use? Now I'm fascinated with quantum physics, and I've gone through certain books on the beginning of life, and clearly things happen by conscious input. It doesn't. We're not talking about human input. We're talking about conscious input, and so when certain cells have to change, consciousness has to enter into the process. Without consciousness, there would be no change. So I can understand how this is germane to what we're talking about, but can we relate it to, or are we at the point where we can relate that to a specific process which might lead us into the production of energy? Is this...
what I'm trying to say, what I think I'm trying to represent right here, is that this paradigm has already emerged into our environment. We say to ourselves, well, I don't see this, I can't go out and buy it, so I don't think it exists. But you just have to take my word, unless you want to investigate yourself, the shoe leather part. And it's like that with anything. Wherever the single mind or the all minds at large go, then that thing will then appear in our universe. That's the way. That's another way of saying, during the interview that we had a minute ago, is that the intention for whatever the desire is sent out in a clear form, very precise, and then it is released. And then the product, the way the universe that we live in works, is it's a dialoguing return. It's a cycle, sowing and reaping. And then we get our answer. And that works with single minds or minds at large. And so wherever we're going with our minds, it will appear. And, if that sounds freaky to people, well...
Let's assume that's true. I sense this bears on the problem we've introduced, is to how we capture energy from the vacuum. Let's review again how this phenomena, if you will, would help us?
Well, it's going to make the perceived lack of energy, the struggle for the means of survival, will finally become secondary. That's been primary ever since we developed our consciousnesses to the point where we separated ourselves from the animals, and that's been going on for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years in traditional history. And so we're getting to a point in our evolution where that's secondary, going to be secondary, because the point I'm trying to make is that that's already been done. It hasn't been actualized in our environment. And the reason and the problem is that it also requires, use a word people may not agree with, spiritual. We're going to have to ascend into the area above, whether we think we'll keep living or not. Do we want to keep living or not? That is where all of our conflicts really come in. It's an unconscious, ancient inheritance that we have. Are we going to live until the next day? And if we can consciously make the decision, yes, we want to live for the next day, and we're not going to die, and we're going to be pro-life, in the sense that we're going to enhance life processes and constructive things, then we'll be ready to accept the unlimited energy which is there. It's always been there, and
somehow we'll uncover it.
It's uncovered. It's already been inspired in individuals in the environment. It's already here. I didn't bring it to the interview, but I'm working on it. Maybe in another, next
you mean
interview.
mentally, or the actual
The
product?
actual device, yeah.
Actual device.
Nice functioning device that just runs perpetually.
The actual device has been proposed many times in this, yet it hasn't been successful, but the will is there.
Well, your usage of words, we're getting into semantics.
Maybe
It hasn't been successfully introduced into the society at large.
because people can't believe it.
Yeah, because they're still thinking, God, we live in a terrible world when we don't have enough energy, and we're running out of energy. And my God, can we live? Can we keep eating?
In that thought form.
Right, it's the
It's very
obstruction.
destructive,
It's the obstruction.
But you have to get through that thought
That's
form,
right.
don't
You have to get to a place where you release that.
But John, let's go back again.
You have a sitting
Can-
chair.
You have a group
Yeah.
which examines people that have proposed devices which create more energy than they use. Is in pragmatic terms, have any of these been successful?
Well, we don't make that statement that we're creating more energy than we're using. What we're saying is we're converting energy
All right, let me rephrase that. Can we demonstrate that we are actually using energy from the vacuum?
Yes, because there's no other source of the energy or the power that gets converted from the energy. So it's the only candidate. If you go out and check science, you have all of the sources of energy or matter containing energy, the equivalent form of energy that can be measured and observed. And if you have energy that you're bringing in and you're converting it to do work, and yet there's no source for this energy, what do you say then?
In common, I'm a chemical engineer, and that was one of the first things we had to do
Right.
in some piece of equipment like a blast furnace was to basically, before you got started, you ran a mass and energy balance, and they had to balance.
Right.
In this case, they're not going to balance.
They won't balance as long as the scientists, the theoreticians, disregard the quantum mechanical vacuum,
Right.
which is this
Yes.
flux of particles.
Yeah, assuming a macroscopic, not a subquantum balance, but a macroscopic balance
Yeah.
will not balance.
It will fail.
Right.
And while it's failing, and while all the scientists are disgruntled and calling persons like myself pseudoscientists, we'll get in our car that has no fuel and we'll just drive away. and that is an argument I'm trying to make to people, is that experiment will have to pound it into their head to show them the old dictum that a valid experiment can overrule theory every time.
Yeah.
What do you think, John? Do you think it can happen? Because you're a man of
No,
maturity and
now wait a
wisdom.
minute. Let me back off. I think it can happen. I wonder if it has happened.
It may have already happened.
It may have. I'm.
Well,
Maybe
there-
in past civilizations.
there's
too.
a-
Maybe Egypt.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, there's a communal group in Switzerland called the Methernitha community. And it's a closed community. And they have energy conversion devices there that do not use fuel. And their whole community runs on fuelless electrical power from the environment.
Now,
Do you believe
where
that,
is
John?
this?
It's in Switzerland.
I heard rumors of that because I was in Cyprus trying to build an eco village. I just wanted something simple like bringing the water up from 2,000 feet or whatever.
The inventor's name of the device is called the Swiss ML converter, who was a guy by the name of Paul Baumann, Bauman, and so people can go get that information. Methernitha.
I heard they were keeping it from the world because
They
they
are.
love the world.
Because Paul Baumann knew that the source of the energy is too powerful for unscrupulous types, ill-willed people to take it.
Well,
you
as
know.
long as he's sitting on it, then people who are keeping the price of the dollar up by oil are probably very happy.
That's a big problem. How to overcome that?
In other words, the guy in Switzerland's got to take a risk,
The way that
and the guy who's covering the petrodollar has to.
Excuse me. The way that I see to overcome it is that the energy conversion devices, since the source of the energy is everywhere, that's a characteristic of the energy conversion devices and the energy itself. It's everywhere, and so every man or woman will then somehow take the information to heart, and then it will rise up at the grassroots level after a long period of time until it can't be suppressed like you're describing.
Right, from either direction.
And I
either.
think the interviews that you're doing help out.
We have a minute. What do you think, John?
Well, in general theory or in general philosophy, I agree with what John is saying. I guess my mind doesn't. I'm searching for a machine and how you build a practical machine, because that's the way energy is always developed. Energy came from mechanization. The Archimedes screw, all of the energy, the steam engine, the diesel engine, the combustion, internal combustion engine, all the devices. And it takes a mechanical engineer like John to build a device. Now,
I'm working on it.
in general, I agree with you that the device could be widespread, but it's still going to have to be a device. Early capital was always described as machines. In other words, you save, you work, you save. What you don't consume, you put into a machine, which turns around and does the job cheaper than what you can do by manual labor. So the machine enters in. And in this case, we have to have, I won't call it a machine, I'll call it a device, but somebody has got to make the device.
Or a technology? It doesn't does it have to be physical?
Well, if technology results in a device. The technology is a process.
It's a thing.
It's a process.
It's a
The
process.
device is the machine, like the one you hold.
Right.
Technology leads to that machine.
Right. But there was a lot of thought process behind it.
Oh, all right, but you can't make pictures by thought. Well, you might. I'm not saying. I won't
That's
say
right.
anything is impossible.
Yeah.
But in general,
That's what Hal said.
Peter Urkos was an
Okay,
adept
all
that
right.
could project images out into space.
I'll
that
not
could be
make too many
photographed.
statements.
No, make a few more. Let's run it. We have 3 minutes till the
Well, I
tape
think
ends.
what John was getting at is that, you know, the thing is universal energy, free energy that comes from the environment. We don't have to pay for it. It's something that people don't, common sense thinkers think that it's counterintuitive because we have to work and sweat for everything that we get. But for those common sense thinkers, you have to remember that the environment source provides living conditions for us for free. Don't forget the environment. We don't destroy it, could essentially go on forever, or our scope of what we think of as forever. And so we have to get past the thought that causes us to stumble, that this free energy from the environment seems to be something for nothing. It's going to require a capital cost. The energy of the environment, which seems to be perpetual in our short human scale, is there already. Let's think of that energy from the environment. Think of it as being universal, not only from what we can touch and feel, but just exists in the things that we can't observe and is universal everywhere. As a matter of fact, the quantum physicists say that this material universe that we live in floats like a boat on the water of the universal sea of energy.
I liked your thought process, John, that we know what energy does. Like gravity, we know what gravity does, but we don't know really what either of those gentlemen are, A photon, for instance, is a form of energy which produces a reaction to your nervous system so that you see light. But light is simply a phenomena of energy. So what's energy?
Right.
The ability to do work, yeah, that's true, and that's what energy does. But what is energy?
Well, that gets into higher level philosophy, John, and mental constructs, things that exist in the mind only, and that's really a separate discussion because we could really run off the track for lay people, to get into that area where what I was trying to make the point to Paula before is that consciousness is primary.
The other point that Mr. Bearden brings up, which I love, is a photon, by definition, can either be, since it doesn't have any mass, it either can have no mass, or since it travels at the speed of light, it can have infinite mass.
Well, yeah.
So take your pick, 0 or infinite.
Well, there are a lot of arguments about what the photon actually is. Two-dimensional particle, and so on. Existing in a three-dimensional universe with time, which we have. So there's something that sort of like requires a lot of thinking.